Hi, everybody. I'm Trevor Alt in Washington, D.C. You're watching The Briefing Room, where we're following a number of very busy and developing stories here in Washington, D.C., in New York City, and all across the world. We have brand new immigration reforms that have been introduced by the Trump administration. We have massive protests happening in Hong Kong, another American city that's in a water crisis with lead in their drinking water. But we want to begin with the major story that's had everybody talking through the weekend, and that is the death of multimillionaire and accused sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. He was, of course, found dead in a cell on Saturday morning. We have the two reporters that broke that story. We have Luke Barr here with me in Washington, D.C. We want to bring him in. We also have Aaron Katursky, who is in New York City, also worked to break this story. And we want to begin with Aaron in New York. Jeffrey Epstein was also in his cell in New York City. There's been a lot of discussion, Aaron, about whether or not Jeffrey Epstein was on suicide watch. We had heard that he had previously tried to commit suicide. We're later hearing he wasn't under suicide watch. And I know that you have some new reporting this afternoon about maybe why that was. What are you learning?
He was taken off suicide watch, Trevor, on July 29th, in part at the request of his criminal defense attorneys, who were urging the Bureau of Prisons to remove him from suicide watch. It is restrictive. It's a special cell. You wear special clothing. You're under constant monitoring. It turns out, though, that may well have saved his life, because after he underwent more than one psychiatric evaluation and after the Deputy Attorney General, Jeffrey Rosen, was informed of the move, in fact, Epstein was taken off suicide watch. And so when he was found in his cell at 6:30 Saturday morning, he had not been on suicide watch. There appears to have been no camera trained on his cell, so no video catching him in the act.
Okay, and of course there are now multiple investigations that have been launched. Luke, I know that you're looking into those and digging into sort of how this occurred, because even if he wasn't on suicide watch, a breakdown had to happen here. I mean, what have you learned about why this could have happened?
So the FBI and the Inspector General, BOP Inspector General, are investigating this. BOP has said as much on the record statement that they put out over the weekend. But there are a lot of questions, right? What happened? Right. How did this breakdown happen, especially with the high-profile inmate? And you know, Trevor, I want to point out this is the third incident in which a BOP facility has been in question, right? We've had the death of the Whitey Bulger in October of 2018, and then we had the big shutdown power outage at MDC in Brooklyn, and now this. And this is going to renew a lot of questions about operations at BOP.
Right, perhaps exposing maybe some more systemic problems with how these high-profile prisoners are being monitored, and these investigations are continuing. But this is also, it's raised some questions about the state of the investigation into Jeffrey Epstein and that sex trafficking charge. We want to play some sound from Attorney General William Barr, because on top of launching these investigations, he did address the continued investigations with the sex trafficking and people who may have been involved with Jeffrey Epstein. So take a listen to that.
Let me assure you that this case will continue on against anyone who was complicit with Epstein. Any co-conspirators should not rest easy. The victims deserve justice, and they will get it.
So that is some assurance from Attorney General William Barr, who has also insisted that there's going to be these continued investigations. He said he was appalled after learning of the death of Jeffrey Epstein. Let's go back to Aaron Katursky in New York, because I know that, Aaron, you have been pretty deep into these Jeffrey Epstein investigations. I know that there's been some discussion about the word conspiracy in the charges against Epstein, which could then lead to other people being charged. Can you just sort of lay out what is the possibility for other people to be charged in these sex trafficking accusations?
At the moment, Trevor, it's only a possibility. He faced 2 criminal charges when he was arrested at the beginning of July: sex trafficking and sex trafficking conspiracy. And we know in a conspiracy it takes at least 2 to tango, right? So there is the possibility that someone else or a number of people may well have been involved. And there's suspicion that has fallen on a British socialite, Ghislaine Maxwell, who was said, according to some of the alleged victims, to be Epstein's madam. But there are others as well who have been alleged to have been involved in procuring women and girls to satisfy Jeffrey Epstein's lurid tastes. And case in point, that the investigation continues, Trevor. Just today, ABC News has observed law enforcement officials from the FBI, Customs and Border Protection, and the NYPD, the same task force that arrested Epstein last month. Those officers and agents were seen at his compound in the U.S. Virgin Islands, arriving for what may well be an extended stay to process evidence.
So that may very well be proof that these investigations are continuing. Aaron, of course, we've heard from some of these accusers specifically, a lot of them saying that they wanted their moment in court. They're seeking justice. Have we heard from these accusers since Jeffrey Epstein's death? What are they saying?
We've heard from a number of them who are really concerned that they will not get their day in court, that their accusations will not go before a proper criminal proceeding, because at the moment there is no one else charged. So there is no one else to prosecute, and there's no one to test their accusations before a judge and jury. On the other hand, look, they know that these investigations continue. They finally feel listened to. But the federal government has come under criticism. They gave Epstein what many consider to be a sweetheart deal back in 2008 to allow him to plead guilty to a lesser charge and serve less than a year in a county prison, mainly on work release. And then finally, he gets charged with federal offenses that many of the victims said should have been brought a decade ago. And now the federal government can't even keep him alive. And so it does point to what the Attorney General called the failings of federal authorities here, even though other arms of the government are working to keep the prosecution and the case alive.
Aaron Katersky in New York City. Aaron, really appreciate it, as well as Luke Barr here in D.C. This is certainly not the last we're going to hear from this story, but we do want to shift gears now to the Trump administration and their changing regulations in terms of immigration and what could impact millions of people trying to get their citizenship here in the United States. We have Serena Marshall, who has been neck deep in all of these new numbers and procedures. Serena, It is kind of a lot to wrap your head around. What I think is interesting is, we talk about immigration all the time with President Trump. It's usually about illegal immigration.
Yes, Trevor.
This is not.
This is not illegal immigration. That is a promise from the president that he's going to tackle illegal immigration. This is about restricting legal immigration. Essentially, it can cut the number of legal immigrants coming to the country, applying for visas, applying for green cards in half. It will not only make it harder to qualify for a visa, it will make it easier for the administration to deny your application. They're now saying that not only do you have to prove that you will not need public benefits to come to the United States, but you have to prove that you will never or could never need public benefits. Now, what this immigration rule change does do is, like I said, it targets legal immigration. It defines that public charge rule. It has never really been defined in the government before to now include anyone who could receive food stamps, Medicaid, or housing subsidies in the future. They're going to be looking at a whole slew of different qualifiers to make that determination, from your education, your ability to speak English, your wealth, how much of the federal poverty guideline numbers do you qualify for. You have to make above the 250% mark in order to be considered a positive weighted factor versus a negative weighted factor. So they are essentially now moving the immigration system to a merit-based system, which is what the president has wanted to do for a very long time. We heard from him in May talking about that merit system. Couldn't get it done in Congress, so now this is essentially them tackling it on their own.
It's pretty staggering, because I know that, they couldn't get that done in Congress. The statistic that I saw that was pretty wild is that 250% that they have to hit. 40% of American-born citizens don't hit that number.
Yeah, that's right.
So it is an important distinction in the way people talk about this. Is I've heard some people incorrectly phrase it as immigrants can decide receive benefits or just work and become a citizen.
Yeah, that's not
actually what it is.
No, that's not how it works. And it's important to also point out, with programs like Medicaid, for example, they're targeting that with this rule change. Already, if you're coming to the United States, you have to prove that you're not going to be a drain on the system. But if you do qualify, you still cannot access those public benefits like Medicaid for 5 years after you've received that access.
Right.
But with this legal change, they're going to be able to move the system away from family-based migration, where you're able to sponsor a grandmother, a parent, your spouse, for example, to more skilled-based migration. And now that can have huge implications on families, for example, separating a parent who might be a stay-at-home parent. No longer will they be able to qualify and come with their spouse who has a job, who has a visa to come and work in the United States, because that spouse might not be making quite enough money to qualify for both of them to attend.
Right, definitely. And it's raising some questions, I know, about the American sentiment of who we want to bring into the country.
Yes.
Some critics have been saying, this might change what America stands for.
The Statue of Liberty.
Right.
There's a question about that to Ken Cuccinelli during today's briefing, actually.
That's right, yeah. So a reporter asked, do we need to take off the "give me your tired, you're poor" statement on the Statue of Liberty? Let's play his response to that.
Well, I'm certainly not prepared to take anything down off the Statue of Liberty. We have a long history of being one of the most welcoming nations in the world on a lot of bases, whether you be an asylee, whether you be coming here to join your family or immigrating yourself. This rule will cover, for USCIS, almost 400,000 people a year whose applications to become legal permanent residents will include a meaningful analysis of whether they're likely to become a public charge or not. I do not think by any means we're ready to take anything off the Statue of Liberty.
But, you know, he said the words meaningful analysis here, and that's really important, Trevor, because essentially they're going to look at these qualifying factors when they're making their determination, and it's now becoming purely subjective. But if you don't qualify because they say that you might need a public benefit in the future, there is an ability to pay a fee and overcome that rule in the amount of around $8,000.
Wow, okay, that is a pretty substantial amount. So that was Ken Cuccinelli. He's the Director of Citizenship and Immigration, speaking at the White House briefing room. We want to go to the White House now. Our reporter, Catherine Falders. Catherine, we know that this is not necessarily a new concept for the Trump administration. They've talked about maybe a merit-based immigration system. Why have they laid out why they think this is necessary?
Yeah, so this is part of a broader push to favor these skilled applicants and those less likely to rely on public assistance. But as you guys were talking about, this president has tried to curb illegal immigration for some time, both legal and illegal. Of course, this is referring to legal immigration, and he's called border crossings. He's referred to them as, quote, an invasion. But I think it's important to point out Stephen Miller, who's the architect of the president's immigration policies. He's really behind the travel ban, behind this new rule. It's been a top priority for him. He's been pushing this for months. So I think that's a lot of what you saw Cuccinelli roll out here today. And I just want to point out the other word we heard a lot from Cuccinelli here in the briefing room was, quote, self-sufficient. He says that this rule is to focus on whether a person is, quote, self-sufficient. When we pressed him on income, for example, he said this has to do with the person of any income and their ability to stand on their own 2 feet, and that should determine whether they'll be able to become a legal permanent resident, Trevor.
And Catherine, we also want to ask, because we know a lot of the Trump administration's decisions on immigration have gotten pushed back legally. Are we hearing that a similar thing's going to happen here?
Yeah, so this is going to be challenged in court. We've heard from a lot of advocacy groups, but the California Attorney General has already said, quote, we are ready to take legal action to protect the rights of all Californians. He calls this new rule vile. He says it's weaponizing essential health care, housing, and nutrition programs. So we've already heard from him on that, and we're likely to hear from many more states and many more groups challenging this in the courts.
Catherine Falders reporting for us from the White House. Catherine, thank you. We also know that with a policy this big that impacts millions of people, we're talking about an enormous economic change. So we want to bring in Hannah Siegel. She is with New American Economy. Hannah, when you're talking about all of these immigrants and all of these workers, I mean, what kind of lasting impact would that have on the American economy?
Yeah, I mean, this would have a huge economic impact for communities all across the country. And when we analyzed the population of people that could be affected by this rule, we found that, you know, the annual income was about $96 billion. And the total loss to the U.S. economy could amount to a total of $164.4 billion, indirect and direct dollars considered. So this really isn't just about, you know, figuring out who is likely to succeed here. It's about disrupting local economies across the country, potentially.
And Hannah, you, in your report, the New American Economy report, it said it's going to specifically hit certain industries like construction, food services, and hospitality in particular. How do we see those industries actually grappling with this new rule?
Yeah. So we have some really interesting stats there. Construction, there are about 5% of construction workers, or more than 500,000 people who are likely to be affected by this rule. Hospitality, recreation, food services, another more than 500,000, 525,000 people likely to be affected. You see similar numbers in manufacturing. There are industries across the country that really depend on immigrants who could now be denied entry because of this rule. And, you know, we have a long history in the United States of welcoming people of all types to, you know, grow our communities, but also to grow our economies. And this rule really threatens that.
And Hannah, when you look at a lot of big corporations in the United States, many of those were started by immigrants or children of immigrants. Amazon, for example, Jeff Bezos, a child of immigrants. You also have companies like DuPont and whatnot, large corporations that were started by immigrants. When you look back, would families, I know this is a hypothetical, but you have families that perhaps might not no longer qualify who could go on potentially to create a giant company like DuPont.
Absolutely. I mean, so today, more than 44% of Fortune 500 companies were founded by an immigrant or a child of immigrants. And, you know, this country has such a long history of bringing people here who maybe don't have much in their pocket, but who work hard and build a life, and they do well, and their children do even better. And that really is the story of the United States and the story of our economic success. And so, again, I think a rule like this could really threaten that kind of success down the line.
That's Hannah Siegel, the managing editor of New American Economy. Hannah, thank you for your time. Serena, thank you. This is a very complex issue. We're going to be hearing a lot about it and a lot of pushback. Okay, we don't want to move overseas now because we have the latest in what has been continuous developments happening in Hong Kong. Massive protests. We want to take you out live to the Hong Kong airport, where I know that they have been shutting down that airport there. It's international, and they have been closing, canceling many flights. We have seen hundreds, thousands of people in what's just the latest chapter in these ongoing Hong Kong protests. That is also another relatively complicated issue. So to get a little perspective, we have Victoria Hoy. She's a faculty fellow with the University of Notre Dame. Victoria, I don't need you to go through the entire saga that's led up to this protest. I know it's involved decades-long conflict, you could say, with China and Hong Kong, and there's some people that are crying for democracy. Can you give us in a nutshell what has led up to this latest moment of protest?
The most important is that the government introduced an extradition bill in February, which would allow the Hong Kong government to extradite people, anyone in Hong Kong. It could be travelers, it could be Hong Kong people, to mainland China across the border. This was a very big last straw for a lot of Hong Kong people, because Hong Kong is supposed to have its own independent judiciary. And if Hong Kong people are not tried in Hong Kong but sent to Beijing, sent to across the border for trial, people really don't have any faith. And then after the first 1 million protests on June 9th, the government continued to say that we're going to continue with the deliberation on the following Wednesday. And then tens of thousands of people surrounded the Legislative Council. And the government, at the end of the day, still insisted that the bill was going to go ahead later on. And on that day already, the police began to use excessive force, which also outraged people. And then a few days later on Saturday, the government said, we're going to suspend the bill. But they didn't really do anything else. And Hong Kong people don't believe that. So long as the bill is still on the table, then the government could sneak it in anytime. So the next day.
Okay, well, it appears that we've lost Victoria Hoy there, but this is an ongoing and chaotic situation in Hong Kong, as you've seen from those videos that we'll be keeping a very close eye on as this continues to unfold. We do want to bring it back to the United States, where we have yet another water crisis on our hands in an American city. This time it's happening in Newark, New Jersey, where just within the past hour or so, the city actually started handing out bottles of water because there's contamination of lead in the drinking water. So we want to go out to Newark, New Jersey. We have a man named Anthony Diaz, who has been, he's a member of the Newark Water Coalition. Anthony, we appreciate you joining us here. The latest development is that there was reports of lead in the water. We know that the city handed out water filters, and then the latest test, they tested 3 houses. 2 of the 3, even with the water filters, had too much lead that was above the threshold. So why don't you just take us through what it has been like for you living in Newark, New Jersey?
So one of the things that's really interesting is that with the work of the Water Coalition is we've been saying this, since this whole crisis has started, that this issue is big. It affects the entire city. You really, the administration needs to do more than what it's doing. And a lot of the pushback that we've been getting is that, hey, you guys are making this a bigger deal than it actually is. And we kind of feel validated in a way that, hey, we were right all along, and now it's time to just really get to work. What we really care about is solutions, trying to figure out how we can best help the people of Newark. That's all we really care about.
Okay, and what do you think the solution is at this point?
Well, right now, since the federal government is involved, we need, more resources. We need more manpower. We need, a comprehensive look at our infrastructure. And we just need all the lead lines replaced. We don't need them replaced 8 years from now. We need them replaced as of yesterday. And I think now that, people are really understanding that this is a crisis and understanding, hey, we have to use bottled water, I think that it's going to be all hands on deck. You have
No, I'm sorry. Continue. I didn't mean to cut you off. There you go. Go ahead. Continue.
Presidential election, you have, Menendez, you have these bigwig politicians, and I think now it's kind of like hold their feet to the fire and say, listen, you need to bring all the resources of Washington into the state of New Jersey, and more specifically into the city of Newark.
That's Anthony Diaz with the Newark Water Coalition. Anthony, I think you make a very interesting point in that this did not happen overnight. This is something that has been building, and we've seen a little bit of pushback leading up to this point up until now, where it does seem that the government is embracing that this is, in fact, a water crisis. And we have a statement, a joint statement from the governor of New Jersey and also the mayor of New York. If we can pull that up. What they say is the city of Newark is currently expanding testing of filtered drinking water to more Newark homes and in coordination with the Department of Environmental Protection. And it's actively working with the filter manufacturer to determine the scope of the situation and to identify the required corrective action as soon as possible. So according to the governor and the mayor, they're now working on fixing what is this ongoing crisis. Anthony, we do appreciate your time. I want to put this in a broader context. We have Stephanie Ebbs, our environmental reporter here. We already had what happened in Flint, Michigan. Stephanie, it feels like for a first world country, having drinking water that's not dangerous is pretty baseline. Why does this keep happening?
Well, it kind of ties into, why are we always talking about Infrastructure Week in Washington? Yeah. Everyone wants to joke, oh, it's Infrastructure Week again. This is actually one of the biggest issues, one could argue, facing our country. And one of the legacies of Flint really is forcing everyone to kind of grapple with that issue again. Water infrastructure especially, the Environmental Protection Agency estimates that we need to spend $472 billion, that's billion with a B, over the next 20 years to upgrade this infrastructure in order to keep our water safe. And that means that we have probably neglected it for a long time in failing to update it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd think when you hear failing infrastructure in the United States, I think your natural instinct is to think our roads have potholes or our bridges are a little shaky. This is a direct problem that could impact thousands, millions of people, and it's happening right now.
Absolutely. There's, 6 million lead service lines in the United States, and that's only what we know about. That's connecting your water system to your home. That doesn't account for lead plumbing inside of older homes. Right. You rely on the water out of your faucet every day. You don't think about how it gets there. Even though the country has known about the danger of being exposed to lead for decades now, I think there's kind of a reckoning now that maybe we got a little bit complacent about keeping up with that and protecting it, and now kind of having to grapple with what happens when you wait too long.
Because you do kind of wonder, we had Flint, now it's Newark, what's going to be the next city? That massive figure that you threw out, hundreds of billions of dollars. Are we looking at current policy? Are we going to get anywhere close to that?
So the EPA is actually nearing the finish line on a new lead and copper rule, and this is a rule that would have very significant impact for cities across the country. It could mandate that lead service lines be replaced. It could, they could change the rules that haven't been updated in some time about how we deal with these systems, which if you're talking about the public health benefit, could be huge for these cities. Also, they're going to have to grapple with the enormous cost to cities and to private homeowners to deal with that infrastructure problem.
Yeah, I think that we're seeing now in all of these cities, you can't keep kicking the can down the road. Solutions are necessary. All right, that's Stephanie Ebbs, our environmental reporter. Really appreciate your time. And of course, now we're not going to get through the briefing room without talking about the 2020 election. So we want to go out to Iowa. We've got our campaign reporter, Adam Kelsey. We're in the midst of this Iowa State Fair. And Adam, I know that you've been seeing, I've seen all this constant video, people dropping their corn kernels in to vote. You've been there with all the candidates, talking to all of these voters. I mean, what's been the big takeaways over the past weekend?
Well, good afternoon, Trevor. We had 21 candidates, as you said, here at the State Fair over the course of the past 4 days, getting a little bit of a break today as no candidates are here on the political soapbox. But that doesn't mean, as you said, politics hasn't still been top of mind. And we've been talking to so many voters about their preferences, and we've been asking them a pretty straightforward question. If the Iowa caucus was tomorrow, who would you support?
I would vote for Donald Trump. He is the first president who's done everything that he said he's going to do.
I would vote for Elizabeth Warren, just her strength in speaking up against President Trump.
I would vote for the governor of Montana, and because he is really strong on environmental, but he's done a wonderful job with his Medicaid.
Donald Trump, because I think he's doing an excellent job on the economy, and I vote my pocketbook.
I believe that Biden is the direction we need to move. I'm returning back to maybe some of the fundamental aspects of my beliefs, for health care.
I would vote for Donald Trump because he is for America and he is honest.
Elizabeth Warren. I think it's time for a woman to be in the White House, and I think that she's the right woman.
No one.
Why?
I don't like anybody that's running.
So a wide variety of responses there, including some, as you just heard, who are not ready to make that final decision. But the one thing, Trevor, that we've noticed is when we talk to these Iowa caucus goers and potential caucus goers is how seriously they take this responsibility. They say that they look out at this wide field of Democratic candidates. They want to take the time to learn all of their policies, all of their positions, and set the tone for the rest of these states as primary season rolls on in 2020.
I do think that's interesting, Adam, because I myself, I've got Midwestern roots, being from Ohio, but of course it's not the lead state when it comes to the primaries. I'm curious, are you hearing from any voters who are just saying it's too early? We're seeing the video, all of the candidates now. We're talking about more than 20 candidates. A lot of people that I talk to from back home say it's too early, there's too many people, let me know when there's like 4 or 5 left. Are you hearing anything similar, or is everybody plugged in?
Yeah, it seems to be one extreme or the other. On the one hand, you have folks who say that as soon as Joe Biden, as soon as Elizabeth Warren, as soon as Bernie Sanders got into the race, their mind was made up. That was going to be their candidate the entire way through. On the flip side, like you're talking about, you have a few more apathetic voters out there who are saying to themselves, listen, it's still August. This is the Iowa State Fair. This is traditionally the kickoff to caucus campaign season. I'm just starting to pay attention now. But in Iowa, as a whole, you tend to have, as I was saying, more educated voters than the rest of the country because they're already starting to think about that caucus process. And as you know, it's a little bit complicated. They get into that room next February. They're allowed to state their case. They're allowed to change their mind. It's kind of like ranked choice voting, but in person. So a little bit more complicated of a situation, something that they have to be read in on before they get to those caucus rooms. Trevor?
Adam, while we got you here, what's been the superstar fair food that you've had?
Too many to count at this point. I'm starting to get meat sweats from the fried bologna I just had, but I think all of our ABC reporters are in agreement. The peppermint ice cream bar has been our favorite.
Interesting. Okay, the peppermint ice cream bar. That is on-the-ground news you can use. Adam Kelsey, our campaign reporter. Adam, thanks for making time for us. That is going to do it for us today here in the briefing room. Thanks, everybody, for watching. You can catch us tomorrow at 3:30, 5:30, and 6:30, and always on abc.com and ABC News Live. I'm Trevor Alton, Washington. Have a great day.
ABC News.